Hey South Hills, today I have our Santa Clarita campus pastor with me, Pastor Ephraim Pena. One thing that we love about South Hills is the life change that happens at all of our campuses on a weekly basis. So I want to have Pastor Ephraim share this story with you guys.
We want to be a place where everyone feels loved, accepted, and welcome. And the common thread that we're hearing over and over is that people are coming to our campus and finding a place to call home, where they are feeling loved, accepted, and welcome despite the things that are going on in their life. In particular, we had someone who recently started coming, attending, and said, over these last several weeks of just being here, my family and I have experienced such a change emotionally, spiritually. Our lives are being transformed as we sit here and attend. Just the relationships that are being developed, the messages that are coming through are so impactful that we cannot stop talking about it, taking us out of a gloomy period of life and just showing us His love.
South Hills, I just want to encourage you to continue to open up your heart and transform your heart. So today we just want to celebrate. We want to recognize what God is doing at our campuses and what God is doing at Santa Clarita.
Into the ring. As we get going this morning, I saw this really heartwarming note that one son left for his mom on Mother's Day, and it says, Mom, I just wanted to tell you that Mother's Day wouldn't be possible without me. I'll be waiting for my present in the living room. Love, Joshua. That kid is going places. I like that. You're welcome. I don't know if this has ever happened to you as a kid, but did you ever have a moment where you realized that your mom didn't always enjoy every single second of being a mom? Like she loved it and she loved you and she was really good at it, but there was this moment where something happened and the curtain sort of got pulled back a little bit, or you reached an age where like you actually were more in tune with what was going on, and then you saw it, and it's like that sort of like confusion, like, what do you mean, like, you're a person with a life that doesn't revolve around me? Like, I thought I was the center of your universe. So when I was a kid, way back in the 1900s, we drank way more Kool-Aid than we did soda because we were poor, and so we never bought soda. And my mom was a single mom, and she worked a ton, and I cannot remember her splurging or doing anything for herself really ever, but I do remember that she liked to drink Pepsi. And it was one of the few things that she kind of enjoyed regularly. It was one of the few sort of like, extra things that she did for herself. But because we didn't have it a ton, we didn't drink soda that often, whenever she had one, inevitably one or all of us, I have a whole bunch of siblings, we would eventually just sort of slyly work our way over there like, hey, Mom, how's it going? Hey, can I have a drink of your soda? And I remember it was like when I was like 6 or 7 that I started noticing just how annoyed she was whenever that happened. Like whenever any of us asked her for a drink of her soda, she always did it, but she always did it with an attitude. She always gave us a drink, but it was just like, fine, like just totally annoyed. And I remember thinking like, oh, like she's not just a mom, like she's a person that gets annoyed. Like she loves us and she loves being a mom, but it's not always awesome for her. I thought she just loved sharing everything she has with me, but she apparently doesn't. And I don't have to tell you, like, moms are pretty amazing, but there's obviously a lot of expectations and pressures that come with the territory, many of them sort of unspoken. Whether it's from your own upbringing or your own ideals or the people around us or society in general, like there's all these expectations and pressures that sort of get placed on women and particularly on moms in our culture. And all of that may actually at least partially explain why women experience depression at a clip that's roughly twice of that of what men experience it. And what's interesting is that the issues that most often result in depression among women are related to hormones and childbirth and infertility and menopause. And so basically everything related to reproduction and motherhood is really depressing. And it typically hits between the ages of 25 and 45, which is really helpful because there's not really a lot going on in your life during that stage of life and during those years, right? Like you're just smooth sailing. You don't have a lot of responsibilities or other things happening. But the question is, where does all the pressure and all the stress come from? Well, besides the weight of just like normal responsibilities in life, a big part of it for us in our culture is what cultural anthropologists or sociologists in our culture have kind of coined this phrase, the myth of effortless perfection. Like the pressure to appear like you're amazing at everything without even trying. And it's really everywhere in our culture. It's not just for ladies or for moms. And so see how much you can relate to some of this. So Everlast Perfection says that you should never have to prepare, but should still be smart and smooth and successful. Like you should talk about how much you have to do, but never let anybody actually see you doing any of it. You should appear carefree and fun, but don't overdo it and be silly. And you should also be conscientious and responsible. You should be able to joke and riff and comment on any topic, whether it's politics or movies or TV or just culture or education or whatever. You should be completely unique, but also completely fit in. You should hide loss and failure and sadness and never, ever, ever let people see you sad. You should talk about or post about little everyday annoyances and frustrations because that's cool and kind of makes you relatable and everybody sort of understands that. But definitely don't bring up any real, long-lasting, heavy struggles because people don't really care or have time for all of that. And whatever you do, just don't be the downer in the room. Just don't bring the vibe down, man. Everybody wants to feel better. Like Effortless Perfection was actually originally created to reference the pressure that's on women in our culture to be smart and beautiful and thin and popular all at the same time without looking like they tried to be that way. And that's all before they even get to them being a mom. With all the expectations of raising like perfectly well-rounded and well-behaved kids and giving them every advantage and opportunity and staying fit and in shape into your 50s and keeping the house and the laundry clean and contributing financially and creating delicious and healthy home-cooked meals and being active in your community and most definitely keeping the romance alive in your love life. And that's it. That's all you got to do, ladies. So let's get to it. Come on, let's make it happen. Yeah. No wonder the depression stats are what they are, right? I mean, life is tough on all of us, but especially on women and especially on moms. Now, if any of that resonated, if you resonated with any of that, there's a story that we're going to look at in the scriptures that I think really speaks to some of this. And although it's technically it's not about being a mom, it's really a story about really wanting to be a mom, but not being able to have kids. And how absolutely crushing that is and how nobody gets it and how you feel weird on holidays and days like today because you want to be happy for people, but you also feel like broken and hurting and less than. And nobody has to say anything to make you feel that way, but it's just complicated. And this really resonates with us because my wife and I have an amazing family. We have 4 amazing kids, but they're all adopted because we didn't know, but we were infertile. And so we started trying to have a family, and it just didn't happen. And we went down the infertility road, and if you've ever been down that road, it is a cruel road because it's like an emotional roller coaster. And so we did artificial inseminations, and we did a couple of in vitros, and every time it was like, it's going to happen. It didn't happen. And it just can be so gut-wrenching. And so this story is more of a story about that. And so it's found in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Beginning with verse 2, it says this. It says, Elkanah had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. So we're going to read this story in chunks, by the way, and I'm just going to stop and point out some things, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. And any story that involves sister wives, right off the bat, this is going to be a good story, right? This is going to be, all right, lean in. There's some good stuff about to happen. Then a couple verses later, it says this in 1 Samuel 1. It says, each year Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord at the tabernacle. And the priests of the Lord at that time were the 2 sons of Eli, Phinehas, and Ferb was off doing something else. His lesser-known brother Hophni was available. On the days that Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to Peninnah and each of her children. And although he loved Hannah, he would only give her one choice portion because the Lord had given her no children. So you have this guy Elkanah. He's got 2 wives, Peninnah and Hannah. He loves them both. Peninnah's got kids. They go to sacrifice and worship every year. And when they get there, they make the sacrifice, and he takes the best of the sacrifice and he gives it to Peninnah and her kids because, well, they have kids. And he loves Hannah, but you haven't given me any kids. So you just get you get the leftovers. And although he loves her, but for a whole bunch of reasons, her inability to conceive made him see her as less. And so it's not just people on the outside that she didn't know that were treating her as different. It's her own family. Her own husband's like, you know what, I love you, but you got to be giving me some kids. And so the people in this story begin to justify the way that they're treating her because, well, clearly she's being punished by God. This is the first sort of allusion in this story where they're like, it's God's fault. You must have done something. God's not giving you kids. And so it's honestly like, this is your fault. We wouldn't treat you differently if God wasn't treating you differently, right? Because and honestly, like that's devastating no matter who you are. Forget the circumstances of this story right now. Like whenever anybody uses God as a justification to mistreat you, like that's devastating, right? And so for Hannah, she's like already crushed because she can't have kids, and society is telling her that she's not good enough, and her own husband thinks that there's something wrong with her, and now also apparently God is the one that's punishing her. And so in this really low moment, things can't get any worse until they do. So the next couple of verses, it says this. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having kids. Year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle, and each time Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat. Are you starting to classify people in this story? Like, okay, now I'm starting to get what Peninnah's like. This is the kind of person she is. I mean, this is brutal, right? Because it's bad enough when you think about who it is. I mean, this is not some stranger. This is somebody that knows her. And it's bad enough when you think about what she's doing and the things that she's mocking her for and they're taunting her for. But stop and think about where they are. They're at the temple. She would wait till they basically went to church, and they're there to pray and worship and sacrifice to God. And while they're there, she's like, hey, in addition to the sacrifice and the worshiping and the prayer, I'd like to mix in a little bit of self-righteous judgment and mocking of other people, which is honestly, if you've ever experienced that in church, that's a big reason why so many people struggle with going to church, right? It's not God. Most people are like, you know what my problem with church is? It's Jesus. That guy's just such a jerk. No, nobody's ever said that. Nobody's ever like, you know what my problem with church is? I just can't get with God. He's just too loving. And the people that do think he's judgmental and harsh, they usually got that idea from the way that people who represented him treated them. So it's not God that people are hung up with most of the time. It's some of the people. And to be honest, it's not even the self-righteousness or the judgment or the mocking itself, because honestly, in our culture, that's everywhere you turn, right? And in fact, that's all of humanity, no matter where you go. It's not unique that somebody would mock you or taunt you or be self-righteous. But even people who don't believe in God somehow intuitively know that this should be the one place where that stuff doesn't happen. That's why it's so hurtful and harmful and toxic. Because when you get judged and mocked by people and places that are known for that, I mean, that's one thing. But to be judged and mocked in the place where you expected to find hope and love and grace and acceptance is absolutely devastating. And whether that's for addiction or infertility or depression or whatever, it doesn't matter. Especially when those people and those places represent and speak for God or speak on behalf of God. And so before we look again at the story, I just want to take a second and say, if you've had that experience, if you stepped into a church or you were around some Christians, people who follow the Bible, people who, maybe you've been around some church leaders and they have judged you or mocked you or were self-righteous and pushed you out, like, would you just allow me to stand in the place for them this morning and just say how, like, that is not the heart of God towards you. And like, how very sorry I am that has happened, that is not God's intention towards, that's not his heart for you at all. And so Hannah is overwhelmed and hurt and depressed, and she won't eat, which for some of us isn't a big deal, right? Because that's how you're wired. When you're upset, when you're hurting, when you're overwhelmed, when you're depressed, you don't eat. That's how my wife is. When she's upset, she doesn't eat. And I ain't like that. I'm the opposite. I'm the exact opposite. In fact, when I'm all of those things, when I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to eat. When I'm stressed out, I'm going to eat. When I'm depressed, I'm going to eat. All I want to do is eat when I'm stressed and emotional. Anybody like me? A few of us? Okay, there we go. There's my people. Even when I was depressed and went through a period of time in my life when I was depressed, I ate. I like to think that Hannah was more like me because her not eating is presented as proof of just how bad of place that she was in, right? Like, it's like she was so upset, she was so depressed, she wouldn't even eat, which I totally get. And so if you ever see me so distraught that I won't eat, somebody definitely better do some checking on my mental health because something is really wrong. And so now Hannah's husband is about to get involved. And check this out, ladies. You'll love this. He steps in to really bring some good perspective. This is what he says in verse 8. He says, "Why are you crying, Hannah?" Elkanah would ask. "Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me, baby girl. Isn't that better than having 10 sons?" This is such a guy moment. Like, this is awesome. Like, baby, I don't know what you're so worked up about. You got me. Have you seen me with my robe off? Right? And while this is a funny example because it's like a husband and wife, I mean, the truth is, like, we all have a tendency to do this to one another, right? To minimize or to discount what somebody else is going through, right? And the problem with that is when we're vulnerable, when we're in that place, we don't want any of that. We actually want to be validated. We need to be validated. We don't want to be talked out of our feelings. We want to know that somebody sees us, that somebody hears us, that somebody understands us. We don't want to be coached until we've actually been comforted in that place, in that challenge, in that difficulty. I've shared a lot about this recently. Like, I have a tendency to be super, like, positive and optimistic. And so I have this impulse, this compulsion to constantly reframe negative situations. And it's really handy most of the time, but sometimes it's not so handy. And so, like, my favorite, like, it drives my wife crazy, but the phrase I say the most in life is, the good news is, the good news. That's like, I could just deliver the worst possible thing ever happened in life, and I'm going to end it with, the good news is, and I'm going to just find that just positive thing, that positive thread, and pull on it. And most of the time she's like, "Would you just shut up? Nobody cares about the good news right now." See, because reframing can be helpful, but in our effort to bring perspective, sometimes we minimize and downplay and trivialize what's actually happening, what people are going through, how people are feeling. See, that there is a time and a place for reframing and for perspective, maybe even for some advice and some encouragement, but there's also a time and a place for us to just shut up and to support and to love, where there's nothing to do or say, but just to be there. In Hannah's situation, I think there is some reframing or some truth that would have been helpful in this moment, but it wasn't, "Hey, I don't know why you're so upset. You got me." Like, that's not the perspective she needed. I think if he'd have stepped in and said, "Hey, look, I just want you to know you're not alone. Like, God's not mad at you. He's not punishing you. This isn't your fault." But that's not what she got. Finally, she can't take it, and so this happens next in verse 9. Once after the sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. And Eli the priest was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle, and Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And as she was praying, Eli watched her Seeing her lips moving but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. Must you come here drunk? He demanded. Throw away your wine, woman. I added that last part. So she's struggling. Penina's mocking her. Her husband isn't helping. She doesn't know what else to do. So she just kind of removes herself from the situation and decides to go and pray and just kind of plead with and beg God and cry and weep in church. And what happens? The priest accuses her of being drunk. This poor lady, this is like the worst church experience anybody's ever had in the history of spirituality. I mean, but why else would somebody be crying in church unless they're drunk? And honestly, this is why we don't risk being vulnerable, right? Or letting people see us, because then they make assumptions and they jump to conclusions and they, and when it comes to this stuff about depression or anxiety, they just lump us in with whatever example, whatever thing they heard, whatever experience they had, whatever extreme thing they can think of that they ran across one time a few years ago. But here's the challenge with that, right? It's because we just push back and we don't let people see us and we just put up the wall and we kind of just, go inside. But the problem is that healing actually starts with us showing up and letting ourselves be seen, letting other people begin to see us. And that takes incredible amounts of courage, and that takes incredible amounts of being willing to just be truthful and honest about who we are and what we're feeling and what our story's been and what we've been through. I mean, what's crazy for me is because of who I am and my role, I know a bunch of the stories of people sitting in this room, at least part of them. And you would be surprised at some of the things that people have been through and what they're carrying that are sitting across from you or behind you or in front of you. It takes us showing up, letting ourselves be seen. Begin to say what's happening, which is what Hannah does. She says, "Oh no, sir, I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger." I think that's awesome. If you got something, I'll take it. I feel like that's what she's like. Mama needs a drink. But I am very discouraged, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I'm wicked, for I've been praying out of great anguish and sorrow. See, I think this is one of the challenges about this conversation. It is, for so long, churches, places like this, when people came in experiencing depression, anxiety, mental health issues, they felt like they had to say, I don't think that I'm wicked. Don't think that I'm terrible. Does it make me a bad person? Because I have faith and I've been asking God for help and I've been asking him to take it away, and I don't want to deal with this. But it's still there. It's amazing to me that Hannah at this point hasn't just lost it and just gone off. You know what? You can take your choice portions and your wine and your kids and your God and get out of here. She is open and honest, though, without being defensive. I mean, she's not doing anything bad or wrong. She's just doing something that's sort of socially awkward. She wasn't trying to make a scene or draw attention to herself. In fact, she was trying to go off by herself and pray. But she's emotionally messy, and that makes people awkward because we're just really bad at being there for people who are in those situations. In Romans chapter 12, verses 15 and 16, it says, "Be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. Live together in peace with each other. Do not be proud, but make friends with those who seem unimportant. And don't think you know it all." There's so much there. These are really famous verses that get quoted a lot, but we're so bad at it, right? We're bad at being happy with people who are happy because that usually means something good has happened to them and for them, and we get kind of jealous and envious. And we're okay at weeping with those who weep as long as it's not awkward or embarrassing or lasts a really super long time. Because eventually we just want to kind of get back to the good vibes and the good times, and your depression is kind of bringing us down. And as we talked about earlier, just don't be the downer in the room. Some of you have heard me share a lot of this story, but in 2016, a lot of tragedy struck our family. And one of the things that happened about that, where my stepmom, who was married to my dad for 24 years, she was murdered outside a mall. And then my nephew, who was 10 years old, just unexpectedly had a seizure in his sleep, totally healthy, and passed away a couple months later. And so it sent us into a tailspin, and the grief was overwhelming and eventually kind of metastasized into depression for different stages and looked differently for all of us. But it was really, really hard. And at first, people were really supportive, and our church really rallied around us. And there were a lot of people that were kind of leaning in and being there, and people that, and people say all the right things. Take all the time you need. We're with you. The problem is it always takes way longer than people think. And so it only took a couple of months, and it just felt like people were like, you're still talking about that? It's kind of a couple months ago. Time to move on, buddy. And it happens. Because when we love somebody and they're going through something, we immediately come around them, but then our life keeps moving forward, and they're kind of stuck in that same spot. And so no matter what we say to them, we're well-intentioned. We're just really bad at coming back and sitting with them and putting things on pause and allowing them to move forward at their pace. It says, be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. And don't be afraid to get around people who you think are unimportant, who you think be friends and love people who can't do anything for you, who can't advance your life and the thing that you're trying to do. And don't think that you know it all. What if we just took that approach to would come around and help people, or took that approach when it came to a conversation about depression and mental health? That we just look, I don't know it all. I don't even know anything. All I know is that I love you and I want to be there and I want to walk through this with you. See, it's hard when you read verses like this in Romans to come to any other conclusion than that the mental health problems of the individuals in a community are really the problems of that community. Because over and over and over again in the New Testament are all of these instructions about loving one another and bearing one another's burdens and being there for one another and supporting one another. And it's just over and over and over and over again that we have this responsibility to and for one another. It doesn't mean that you have to fix them. It doesn't mean that you should even try to fix them, because you shouldn't. It doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers. It doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries and you don't take care of yourself. But it does mean that God has designed us to love and to help and to serve and to sacrifice for and to inconvenience ourselves for other people. See, that's part of what the New Testament community looks like. That's part of what loving other people like Jesus has loved us looks like. Honestly, if I'm being honest, I think sometimes we don't want people around us to sort of surface their sadness and their depression, because it reminds us of how we're suppressing some of that stuff in our own life. And so in avoiding them and their issues, we're kind of just avoiding something in ourselves. The load that they're carrying reminds us of the load that we're carrying, and that we're messy and we're broken too, just in different ways. But the best gift that you can give the people around you is the real, wonderfully scarred and beautifully messy you. Because when you have the courage to be you, it gives them the courage to be themselves too. I'm 100% certain that if you would show up with all of your story for the people who are around you, the people who are in your life, that your scars would bring hope to someone else. So Hannah tells Eli that she's not drunk. This is how the whole thing kind of ends. Eli says, in that case, go in peace. Go back and have dinner. Go back and eat. Because remember, she got up from the table. She got up from the meal to come and pray. Go in peace. Go back and join your husband. May the God of Israel, grant the request that you have asked him." "Thank you, sir," she exclaimed, and then she went back and began to eat again. She was no longer sad. Now, I'm not quite sure what to make of this moment because we don't know all the details of this story. We're getting just kind of the overview. I think it's interesting that he doesn't apologize. He just was like, "Oh, and that kid, sorry for accusing you of being drunk, but just go away." All right. He just kind of sends her, and it's almost like, "It's okay that you're a mess and you're crying, but could you do it somewhere else? Because it's a little awkward in here." It's making the other people who are sacrificing and wanting to worship feel weird. And he does tell her that God has heard her cry, that he's going to answer her prayer, and at least that's how she takes it. And so she goes and eats something and feels better, which I'm kind of surprised worked for her because I've spent most of my life trying that, as I said a second ago, trying to eat to feel better, and I didn't feel better. I just ended up fat and sad instead of just sad. But here's why I think this story is important, because it makes it easy for us to see how people who are struggling emotionally and mentally don't often, put themselves out there and ask for help. Sometimes people get stuck because they're in denial, because you can't overcome a problem or a situation that you're pretending doesn't exist. And when it comes to, mental health stuff, when it comes to depression, anxiety, all this stuff, like we have all this pressure in our culture to sort of push that to the side and just pretend like we're okay, we're good. And honestly, like for me, that this has kind of been a huge part of my journey with this. In 2018, I went to a counselor just because I was just feeling weird. And I was like, "Hey man, I don't even know what's going on with me. Like, my life is really good. My relationship with my wife is fantastic. My kids are great. I get to do the job that I've wanted to do since I was a little kid. Like, I like everything about my life. I live in a great place, in a great neighborhood, in a great house. I just don't care about any of it. I just want to go home and watch TV. I want to just like go to the movie theater every day and watch a movie." And he's like, "Oh, you're depressed." And I was like, "I'm not depressed. My wife is depressed. You should meet her. I'm great. She's depressed. She'll tell you." He's like, "No, you're depressed." I was talking to a friend who struggles with depression. He's like, "Yeah, man, you're depressed." And I was like, "What?" "That's what my counselor said." He's like, "He's right. You're depressed." I'm like, "You're an idiot. I'm not depressed." My counselor then began to talk to me, and he's like, "Yeah, have you ever," he's like, "You have a rubber band, and like when the rubber band is new, you can pull on it and stretch it and twist it. And then when you relax the tension on it, it just goes right back." And he's like, human beings are kind of like that. He's like, that's what life does to us. It pulls on you, it twists you into knots, and, trauma and all this stuff happens to you. And when you're young, it kind of starts to, you kind of snap back a little. He's like, "But you're not young." He's like, "And so you're kind of like an old, worn out rubber band, and you just got stretched, and now you're just stretched." And I was like, "I'm never coming back to you ever again." But something when he said that, I was like, when he said those words, I knew inside, I was like, that is the perfect description for how I feel. Like life just pulled me apart, and I could just snap back, but I can't snap back. See, sometimes we get stuck because we're in denial. But you can't overcome a problem or a situation that you're pretending doesn't exist. Other times, people get stuck because of fear. Like there's the fear of the unknown. Like if I start to get help with this, what are people going to say to me? What is the doctor going to say? If they tell me I need to take medication, what's the medication going to cost me? What is it going to do to me? What if the doctor hospitalizes me because of something I said that was weird? Like aren't, most therapists just sort of weirdos and quacks anyway? Like, and then there's the stigma or the fear of being misunderstood or, labeled or judged by family and friends and the people you work with and neighbors and church people and kids and parents and anybody who would ever know us or see us. I found it interesting. The word stigma actually comes from an ancient Greek word that means to brand or permanently leave a mark on your body. And I think sometimes that's what it feels like to step out of the shadows and start to talk about mental health stuff, is that you're ringing a bell that can't be unrung. And then you're forever known as the person that has depression. You're forever known as the person that has anxiety. And it's unfair and it feels like too high of a price, and so we stay quiet. And so sometimes we're stuck because of denial, sometimes we're stuck because of fear, and then sometimes we get just stuck because of just how debilitating it is. And people who are suffering often stay stuck because they're just too overwhelmed to act. The road seems so big and you're so buried and so deep. It just seems impossible. We're actually going to get into this a little bit more next week. But this is why I think medication can be helpful. It's not magic. It's not a cure-all. It doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't remove your need to take action, but it can kind of steady some things and level you out a bit. That way you have some clarity and strength and scaffolding to be able to actually take the action you need to take. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, Jesus says this, "Come to me all who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." What an invitation. That you don't have to be strong, that he could be strong for you, that you can just come to him and find some rest. But that's the thing, is that you'll never find the rest and healing that your soul needs as long as you're trying to just power through it on your own. You got to come to Jesus. You have to be willing to say, "Hey, I'm weak, I'm weary, I'm tired." Don't let fear or denial or debilitation keep you stuck where you are. And I love how Jesus describes himself. He describes himself as humble and gentle. And I wonder what would happen if we took him seriously in this invitation. Like what sort of peace and rest and freedom might be available if you allowed yourself to just begin to humbly admit that you need some help. I said last week that every single week of this series that we're going to post a couple of questions, and we're just going to challenge you, invite you, encourage you, whether it's in the quietness of your own thoughts or with a friend or in a small group, that you actually begin to process through some of these questions. And so I want you to think about this week. Like, if you actually believed that your emotional health was essential, what might you need to do even though you're afraid? Who do you have in your life that you could really fully express yourself and your story and your reality to? Jesus seemed to think that your mental and emotional health mattered. And honestly, we do too. And so what if we could change the conversation? Maybe not everywhere, but what if we could change it right here? With the people in our community, with the people that we're connected to, with the people that we're close to. Because the goal really isn't effortless perfection, because that's not achievable. It's surrendered, authentic imperfection. I love what my friend Mike says. He says, there is no normal, there's just slightly more popular versions of weird. Which is true. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2, it says this, "With humility comes wisdom." And for this conversation, I think that means the humility to admit where you're at. The humility to admit that maybe you don't have it all together. The humility to trust other people with your stories and your fears and your failures and your setbacks. Because in the end, what's unspoken almost always goes unhealed. And so it takes humility to admit and to commit to the long road of recovery and healing and getting better. It takes humility to adjust your way of thinking and living. That's the beginning of wisdom and healing. And so I want to invite you this week. In just a moment, we're going to pray. And maybe for you, you're stepping into this conversation on behalf of someone else, on behalf of somebody that you love. But I just want to invite you to bring the conversation out of the shadows and out of the dark and into a place where you can actually begin to talk about it with them. Let's pray together. God, thank you for today. Thank you for your love. We're so grateful that you see us, and in our brokenness and struggle, you invite us, Jesus, to come and bring all of the heaviness of our load and to give it to you. You invite us to come to you and to find the rest that we so desperately long for. And so, Lord, we step into this conversation. For some of us, Lord, this is a conversation that hits us square where we're living. For others, God, there's somebody that we love, somebody that we care about, somebody that depends on us, somebody that is close to us, that is really struggling. Lord, my hope, my prayer for us as a church is, God, we would be a place where people can experience your grace and your love, no matter how they're struggling, no matter what their burdens. God, that they can come here and find Jesus and find rest for their souls. God, that we would be people that are happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. God, that we don't move on and leave others behind, but God, we move forward together, all of us as a family. Lord, thank you for all the moms in the room. God, thank you for loving us and giving yourself for us. We honor you this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.